You never expect the past to walk back into your life wearing a $1 billion smile. That was the strange thought that crossed Daniel Carter's mind the exact moment the classroom door opened and every parent in the room slowly rose to their feet. It was supposed to be a normal Tuesday night in Columbus, Ohio, the kind of early fall evening where the air smelled faintly of rain and the school hallways buzzed softly with tired parents clutching coffee cups and folders. Daniel had arrived 10 minutes early, his worn pickup truck still ticking with heat out in the parking lot, his hands smelling faintly of motor oil from the HVAC job he had finished only an hour before. Parent-teacher night was important to Lily, and when your daughter is 8 years old and believes her dad can fix anything, you don't show up late. He sat quietly in the back corner of the classroom, the metal chair creaking slightly under his weight, watching the other parents filter in. Most of them looked like they belonged to a different world. Crisp button-down shirts, smart watches, quiet conversations about business trips and school fundraisers. Daniel kept his hands folded around a cheap paper coffee cup, the warmth fading quickly against the cool Ohio air that drifted in from the hallway. None of that bothered him. He had learned a long time ago that dignity didn't come from the car you drove or the watch on your wrist. It came from showing up when it mattered. And tonight, he had shown up for Lily. The teacher, Mrs. Langford, was arranging folders at the front desk when suddenly the hallway noise changed. Not louder, just different. A ripple of whispers drifted toward the classroom door like wind moving through dry leaves. Someone near the front quietly said, "Is that really her?" Another parent straightened their posture as if someone important had just walked into the building. Daniel barely noticed at first. He was looking down at a crayon drawing Lily had slipped into his jacket pocket earlier that morning. A stick figure house, a smiling sun, and two people holding hands. One labeled Dad in uneven pencil letters. The other labeled me. He smiled softly to himself. Then the classroom door opened. He looked up casually, and the coffee cup slipped from his fingers. It hit the linoleum floor with a dull splash that no one seemed to hear, because everyone else in the room was already standing. All eyes were fixed on the woman stepping through the doorway. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone used to commanding boardrooms and headlines. Tall, elegant, dark hair pulled neatly behind her shoulders. The kind of presence that made people instinctively shift out of her way. Someone near the front whispered the name under their breath. Sophia Bennett, CEO of Bennett Global Systems, a company worth more than $8 billion. A woman who had been on the cover of Forbes twice before turning 40. But Daniel Carter didn't see a CEO when he looked at her. He saw the girl who once sat beside him on the library steps after midnight, sharing a cheap milkshake and laughing about the future. He saw the girl who disappeared from his life 12 years ago without a goodbye. Sophia Bennett stepped into the classroom. Then her eyes met his across the room. And for the first time that night, the most powerful woman in the building stopped walking. For a moment the classroom did not breathe. Sophia Bennett stood just inside the doorway, her hand still resting lightly against the metal frame as if she had stepped into the wrong room. The murmurs around her were quiet, but full of admiration. Parents whispered her name like it belonged in newspapers and television interviews, not in an elementary school on the west side of Columbus. Mrs. Langford hurried forward with a welcoming smile, clearly nervous but trying to appear composed. She thanked Sophia for visiting the school and mentioned something about a community education partnership. But Daniel Carter did not hear most of it. His eyes were locked on the same person he had not seen in more than a decade. 12 years had passed since the last time he saw her standing beneath a streetlight outside the university library. Back then her hair had been pulled into a loose ponytail, and she had been wearing a faded Ohio State sweatshirt that was 2 sizes too big. Now the woman in front of him wore a tailored charcoal jacket and carried herself with the calm control of someone used to boardrooms and microphones. Yet something about her eyes had not changed at all. Daniel slowly bent down to pick up the empty coffee cup from the floor, wiping the small spill with a napkin as quietly as he could. He told himself it did not matter. People changed. Lives moved forward. He had learned that lesson the hard way. The last 12 years of his life had been simple in ways he never expected. Early mornings before sunrise. Long hours repairing heating units and air conditioners across central Ohio. The quiet responsibility of raising a daughter who believed her father could fix anything in the world except the things that mattered most. Daniel Carter had not planned to become a single father at 29 years old, But life had a way of rewriting plans without asking permission. Still, Lily had been the best surprise that ever walked into his life. 8 years old, curious about everything, always asking questions about the stars and the way engines worked, and whether kindness really mattered as much as her teacher said it did. Every day Daniel tried his best to answer those questions the right way. He worked hard. He stayed honest. And he showed up whenever Lily needed him. That was enough. Or at least it had been. Until tonight. Because now the past was standing 10 feet away in the same classroom where his daughter practiced spelling words and multiplication tables. Sophia listened politely as Mrs. Langford introduced her to the parents, but Daniel could see the slight hesitation in her posture. Her attention drifted across the room, scanning faces with the calm awareness of someone who had spent years reading crowds. Then her gaze stopped again, directly on him. For a brief moment neither of them moved. The room buzzed with quiet conversation about corporate donations and educational programs, yet an invisible thread stretched between the two of them across the classroom. 12 years of silence hung in that space. Sophia finally looked away first. But the small shift in her expression said something words could not. She had recognized him the second she walked through that door. The meeting continued as if nothing unusual had happened, but Daniel Carter felt the quiet weight of the moment settle heavily in his chest. Mrs. Langford began explaining the curriculum for the semester, pointing to charts on the whiteboard and describing reading levels, science projects, and upcoming field trips. Parents nodded and took notes, their pens scratching softly across paper. Daniel tried to focus on the teacher's voice, but the words passed by him like distant radio static. His attention kept drifting back to the woman standing near the front of the room. Sophia Bennett had moved to the side wall, listening politely as the teacher spoke, her posture calm and composed. Yet every few seconds Daniel noticed something subtle. Her eyes scanned the room, and more than once, they returned to him. 12 years had passed, but memory has a strange way of ignoring time. Daniel could still remember the first day they met. It had been late September on the campus of Ohio State University. The afternoon sun had been warm, the kind of early fall day when the leaves had just started turning gold. He had been sitting on the library steps with a textbook open on his lap, trying to finish an assignment before his evening shift at the maintenance shop. Then a voice had asked a simple question. "Is this seat taken?" When he looked up, he saw a girl holding 2 coffees and smiling like the world had not yet given her a reason to be cautious. That girl had been Sophia. She had been studying business administration, always talking about building something meaningful one day, something that would last longer than a paycheck. Daniel had not understood most of her ideas about markets and companies back then, but he had understood her heart. She had believed deeply in hard work, fairness, and the quiet power of loyalty. For 2 years they had been inseparable. Late-night study sessions, cheap dinners at a diner 3 blocks off campus, walks across the oval when the air turned cold enough to see your breath. Daniel had believed that kind of future could last forever, until one night it simply ended. Sophia had disappeared without explanation. No letter, no call, just silence. The kind of silence that leaves questions echoing long after hope fades. Daniel eventually stopped asking those questions. Life had moved forward whether he was ready or not. Lily had been born 2 years later, and every decision after that had revolved around being the father she deserved. Work, responsibility, patience. Those things filled his days now. The past had stayed quiet. Until tonight. Across the classroom Sophia shifted slightly, her hand resting against the back of a chair as she listened to Mrs. Langford describe the school science fair. Parents laughed at something. The teacher said, but Sophia did not laugh. Her eyes were fixed on Daniel again. For a brief moment the noise of the classroom faded away, and the distance between them felt smaller than the 12 years that separated their lives. Then Sophia took a slow breath, straightened her shoulders, and finally spoke. Her voice was calm, polite, and professional. "Mrs. Langford, may I ask a question about the after-school program?" The teacher smiled and nodded. But Daniel noticed something no one else in the room seemed to see. When Sophia asked that question, she was not looking at the teacher. She was looking directly at him. The classroom settled again after Sophia Bennett asked her question, but Daniel Carter could feel the quiet tension still lingering in the air like the calm before a storm. Mrs. Langford explained the details of the after-school science program with cheerful enthusiasm, describing robotics kits, small engineering projects, and a regional competition scheduled for the spring. Parents seemed excited. Several leaned forward in their chairs, asking about volunteer opportunities and transportation schedules. Daniel listened carefully this time because Lily had been talking about science club for weeks. She had spent 3 evenings at the kitchen table building a tiny bridge out of popsicle sticks, insisting it would one day hold 5 pounds of weight if her calculations were correct. Daniel had smiled at her determination even though he barely understood the math behind it. That was the thing about children. They made the future feel possible in ways adults sometimes forgot. Across the room, Sophia remained standing near the wall, her attention focused on the teacher as the conversation continued. She nodded politely, asking thoughtful questions about funding for the program and whether the school had enough equipment for every student who wanted to participate. Mrs. Langford seemed relieved by her interest and quickly explained that the school often struggled to provide enough materials. Budget limits meant only a handful of kits were available each semester. A quiet murmur moved through the parents as they listened. Some looked disappointed, but not surprised. Public schools often carried those kinds of limitations. Sophia was silent for a moment after hearing the explanation. Then she spoke again, her voice calm and steady. She said that every child who wanted to join the science program should have the chance. The room grew quieter. Mrs. Langford blinked in surprise and asked what she meant. Sophia simply replied that her foundation would provide the funding for additional equipment if the school needed it. The words were spoken gently, without any hint of pride or attention-seeking, but the effect on the room was immediate. Parents exchanged looks of amazement. One father near the front whispered something about generosity, while another parent quietly said that was incredibly kind. Daniel watched the reaction without moving. The Sophia he remembered had always believed success meant lifting others up along the way. Back on campus, she used to say that opportunity should never belong to only a few people. Hearing her speak now felt strangely familiar, like listening to a melody that had not changed even after years of silence. Yet the woman standing across the classroom was also someone entirely new. The scale of her life had grown beyond anything Daniel had imagined during those college evenings. The teacher thanked her repeatedly, clearly overwhelmed by the offer. Sophia responded with a polite nod, then finally shifted her attention across the room once more. Her eyes found Daniel again. This time she did not look away quickly. For several seconds, she simply studied him with an expression that held something deeper than recognition. Something closer to memory. Something closer to regret. Daniel felt the old questions stirring quietly in the back of his mind. The ones he had buried years ago because there had never been answers. Why had she left without saying goodbye? Why had the future they once talked about disappeared overnight? And why, after 12 years of silence, had fate chosen this exact classroom on this exact night to place them face to face again? Sophia held his gaze for another moment before speaking once more, but this time her voice carried a different tone. Softer, more personal. She said that she was also curious about something else regarding the students in the class. Then she paused briefly, her eyes still resting on Daniel Carter. And she asked whether any of the parents might be willing to share what kind of future their children dreamed about. The classroom grew quieter after Sophia Bennett asked her question about the children's dreams. For a few seconds no one spoke. Parents shifted slightly in their chairs, unsure whether the question had been directed at anyone in particular or simply offered to. The room. Mrs. Langford smiled politely and encouraged anyone who wanted to share. A mother near the front raised her hand first and spoke about her son wanting to become a veterinarian. Another parent mentioned a daughter who dreamed about being an astronaut one day. The room warmed with gentle laughter and proud voices as people described the bright futures their children imagined. Daniel Carter listened quietly from the back row, his hands resting loosely on the edge of the small desk in front of him. Talking about dreams was always easier when you were describing a child's future instead of your own past. He watched the parents speak with the kind of hopeful energy that classrooms were built to hold. Then Mrs. Langford glanced toward the back of the room and smiled at him. She said that Lily Carter had mentioned during class that her father helped fix machines all over the city and that she thought he knew more about how things worked than anyone she had ever met. A few parents turned in their chairs to look at him. Daniel gave a small polite nod, suddenly aware that attention had shifted in his direction. The teacher continued gently, saying Lily had also written in a short assignment that one day she wanted to design machines that helped people live easier lives. Mrs. Langford said it sounded like the kind of dream that started with curiosity and good examples at home. A quiet ripple of approval moved through the room. Daniel felt the familiar mixture of pride and humility that came every time someone spoke kindly about his daughter. He cleared his throat and spoke in a calm voice, explaining that Lily liked building things out of whatever materials she could find around the house. Popsicle sticks, cardboard boxes, old bolts from his toolbox. Nothing fancy, just imagination and patience. A father near the window chuckled and said that sounded like the beginning of a future engineer. Daniel smiled politely, but did not add anything more. Across the room, Sophia Bennett had been listening to every word. Her expression remained composed, but there was something softer in her eyes now. The proud parents around the room probably assumed she was simply interested in the school's students. Daniel knew better. She had always paid attention to the quiet details most people missed. The teacher thanked Daniel for sharing, and the conversation slowly drifted toward other topics. Yet the room had shifted in a subtle way. The earlier whispers about wealth and influence had faded. Now the focus had returned to the simple purpose of the evening. Children, learning, futures that had not been written yet. Sophia remained silent for a moment longer. Then she finally stepped away from the wall and walked a few feet closer to the desks. Her voice carried calmly across the room when she spoke again. She said that the world needed more children who believed they could build things that helped others. She paused briefly, her eyes resting on Daniel Carter once more. Then she added that sometimes the most important lessons did not come from textbooks or classrooms. Sometimes they came from the people who quietly showed up every day and did the right thing even when no one was watching. And for a moment the entire room seemed to understand that her words were not only about the children. The room remained quiet for a moment after Sophia Bennett finished speaking, the kind of quiet that happens when people sense there is more meaning in a sentence than the words themselves. A few parents nodded politely, assuming her comment had simply been an inspiring observation about family values. But Daniel Carter felt something different behind it. He lowered his eyes briefly, focusing on the edge of the desk in front of him, tracing the worn line in the wood with his thumb as if it might steady the thoughts rising in his chest. 12 years was a long time to bury a chapter of life. Yet memories have a way of returning when the right voice brings them back. Mrs. Langford cleared her throat gently and resumed the meeting, explaining the schedule for upcoming reading assessments and winter activities. The conversation gradually shifted back to ordinary topics. Permission slips, field trips, classroom volunteers. Parents wrote notes and exchanged small comments with one another. The rhythm of the room returned to something normal again. Yet every so often Daniel felt the quiet awareness that someone across the room was still paying attention to him. Sophia stood near the center aisle now, listening politely as the teacher spoke, but her posture carried a faint tension that only someone who once knew her well might notice. She had always been like that even in college. Calm on the surface, thoughtful underneath, as if every moment carried more meaning than it showed. Back then Daniel used to joke that Sophia Bennett never walked into a room without already thinking 5 steps ahead of everyone else. Tonight, however, something about her seemed different, less guarded, more reflective. The teacher eventually concluded the main presentation and invited parents to come forward individually if they had questions about their children's progress. Chairs began scraping softly against the floor as people stood and gathered their coats. Conversations filled the classroom again, this time more relaxed and informal. Daniel remained seated for a moment longer, waiting for the crowd to thin before speaking with Mrs. Langford about Lily's science project. He preferred quieter conversations, the kind that allowed people to think clearly instead of competing for attention. As he stood up and reached for his jacket, a voice behind him spoke quietly but unmistakably. It was not loud enough for the rest of the room to notice, yet it carried a familiarity that made his shoulders stiffen slightly before he even turned around. The voice said his name in a tone that belonged to another time entirely. Daniel Carter. For a brief second, he did not move. The classroom sounds continued around him, but everything else seemed to slow. He had not heard that voice say his full name in more than a decade, yet he recognized it instantly. When he finally turned, Sophia Bennett was standing only a few steps away. Up close, the years between them felt both distant and strangely small at the same time. She offered a polite smile, the kind someone might give an old friend they had unexpectedly met after many years. But her eyes carried something deeper than politeness. They carried the weight of unfinished conversations. Sophia spoke again, her voice calm but softer than before. She said she had wondered if it was really him the moment she walked through the door. Then she paused briefly, studying his face with a quiet seriousness. And she asked the question that had been waiting 12 years to be spoken aloud. She asked if he had a few minutes to talk. Daniel Carter did not answer right away. For a moment, he simply looked at Sophia Bennett, standing there in the middle of a classroom filled with quiet conversations and shuffling chairs, and tried to reconcile the person in front of him with the memory he had carried for 12 years. The Sophia he remembered used to laugh easily, tilting her head slightly when she was thinking about something complicated, her eyes bright with curiosity about the future. The woman standing before him now carried the calm composure of someone who had spent years making decisions that affected thousands of people. Yet the hesitation in her voice when she said his name had sounded exactly the same. Daniel finally nodded once. He said that he had a few minutes. His voice was steady, polite, the way people speak when they are trying to keep old emotions from rising too quickly. Sophia seemed to release a small breath she had been holding. Around them the classroom was slowly emptying as parents gathered their coats and thanked Mrs. Langford for the meeting. The fluorescent lights hummed softly above, and the hallway outside carried the distant echo of students finishing evening activities. Sophia gestured lightly toward the open doorway and suggested they step into the hallway where it would be quieter. Daniel followed without saying anything more. They walked side by side past the row of cubbies where children stored their backpacks and lunch boxes, the bright construction paper artwork taped to the walls fluttering slightly from the movement of air in the corridor. When they reached the hallway, the sounds of the classroom faded behind them. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The silence was not awkward exactly. It was simply heavy with time. Sophia finally turned toward him, folding her hands together as if organizing her thoughts before speaking. She said she had not expected to see him tonight. She explained that her foundation had recently begun supporting educational programs across several school districts in Ohio, and that the visit had been scheduled weeks earlier. She paused briefly before adding that the moment she walked into the classroom, she had thought her eyes were playing a trick on her. Daniel listened without interrupting. He leaned lightly against the hallway wall, his arms crossed in a relaxed posture, though inside his mind was moving through years of unanswered questions. Sophia studied his face carefully, as if searching for the right way to continue. She said she knew that 12 years was a long time to disappear from someone's life without explanation. Her voice carried a quiet seriousness now, very different from the confident tone she had used while speaking to the room earlier. Daniel lifted one eyebrow slightly, a faint expression of curiosity rather than accusation. He said that life had a way of taking people in unexpected directions. It was a simple answer, but Sophia understood the meaning behind it. She nodded slowly and looked down for a moment, the polished floor reflecting the bright hallway lights. Then she looked back at him again. Her expression was thoughtful but also vulnerable in a way that very few people in her world probably ever saw. She said there were things she had wanted to explain for many years but had never known how to begin. Daniel watched her quietly, the past standing between them like an open door neither of them had walked through yet. And after a long breath, Sophia Bennett finally said that the night she disappeared from his life had not been the choice he believed it was. Sophia Bennett's words hung quietly in the hallway between them. The night she disappeared from his life had not been the choice he believed it was. Daniel Carter did not react immediately. He simply watched her with the same steady calm he had carried throughout the evening. Outside the classroom door, parents were still talking softly as they prepared to leave, their voices echoing faintly down the corridor. But in that moment the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them standing beneath the bright hallway lights. Sophia took a slow breath as if she had rehearsed this conversation many times in her mind, but had never truly expected the moment to arrive. She said that 12 years ago, everything in her life had changed in a matter of days. Her father's company had been collapsing under a mountain of financial pressure. Investors were preparing to take control of the entire business. The board of directors had demanded that someone from the Bennett family step in immediately to stabilize the situation. Sophia had been 22 years old at the time, still a college student who believed her future would unfold slowly and naturally. Instead, she was suddenly handed responsibilities that most people did not face until much later in life. She explained that lawyers and advisors surrounded her family within days. Meetings replaced classes. Contracts replaced dreams. The people guiding the company insisted that her personal life needed to disappear while she stepped into leadership. They told her the public image of stability mattered more than anything else during the crisis. Daniel listened quietly, the pieces of a story he had never known slowly forming in front of him. Sophia continued, her voice steady but softer now. She said she had tried to call him several times during those first weeks. Each time someone from the company advised her against it. They warned her that relationships from her past could complicate negotiations and public perception. At the time, she had believed the storm would pass quickly and that she would explain everything once the company was secure again. But the storm had not passed quickly. It had grown larger. Months became years. Every decision pulled her deeper into a world where time disappeared behind responsibilities and expectations. She looked down briefly before speaking again, almost as if admitting something difficult. She said there had not been a single year since then when she had not thought about the night she left without saying goodbye. Daniel remained leaning against the hallway wall, his arms still folded, absorbing each word without interruption. After a moment, he spoke calmly. He said that life rarely waits for perfect explanations. People make choices in the moment with the information they have. Sophia looked up at him again, her expression filled with a quiet mixture of relief and regret. She said she had often wondered what kind of life he had built after she left. Daniel answered simply that life had been different than he expected, but still good. He told her about Lily, about the small routines that shaped his days, about the quiet pride of watching a child discover the world one question at a time. As he spoke, Sophia listened carefully, her eyes reflecting a warmth that had not been there earlier in the evening. When he finished, she smiled gently, the first smile that truly resembled the girl he once knew. Then she said something that made the hallway grow silent again. She said she had not just come tonight to support the school. She had come because earlier that afternoon she had read a student essay about a father who fixed machines and taught his daughter that kindness mattered more than success. And the moment she read the name at the bottom of that paper, she knew there was only one Daniel Carter it could possibly be. Daniel Carter did not speak immediately after Sophia finished her sentence. The hallway lights hummed softly above them, casting long reflections across the polished floor as the last parents began leaving the building. Somewhere down the corridor, a locker door closed with a hollow echo. The ordinary sounds of a school evening slowly returning to quiet. Daniel considered what she had said about the essay, about recognizing his name the moment she read it. He let out a slow breath and nodded slightly. Lily had worked on that assignment for 2 nights at the kitchen table. She had asked him what she should write about when the teacher said the topic was someone who changed the way you see the world. Daniel had told her that she should write whatever felt honest. He had not expected the words of an 8-year-old to travel far beyond a classroom desk. Sophia watched him carefully, the same thoughtful expression resting in her eyes. She said that when she read Lily's description of a father who fixed broken machines during the day and still came home every night to help with homework, something about it had felt familiar. The story had not been about money or success. It had been about patience, kindness, and showing up even when life became difficult. She explained that those were the same qualities she remembered from the man she met on the library steps 12 years ago. Daniel gave a small, quiet smile at that memory. He said that life had a way of teaching people what actually mattered. When you spend enough years raising a child, you begin to understand that the small moments are the ones that shape everything else. Sophia nodded slowly. She said that reading Lily's words had reminded her of the person she used to be before the world demanded so many different versions of her. The confident executive, the strategist, the public figure. Yet underneath all of those roles, she had always hoped she had not completely lost the girl who believed kindness could guide success instead of the other way around. Daniel looked at her with calm understanding. He said that people change, but the important parts of who they are rarely disappear. Sometimes they simply wait for the right moment to return. The hallway had grown almost empty now. The classroom door behind them closed softly as Mrs. Langford finished organizing her papers for the night. Sophia glanced toward the exit where the cool Ohio evening could be seen through the glass doors at the end of the corridor. Then she looked back at Daniel again. There was no pressure in her voice when she spoke next, only a quiet sincerity. She said that she did not expect the past to rewrite itself overnight. Too many years had passed for that. But she wondered if perhaps the future could begin with something simpler. A conversation now and then. Maybe meeting Lily properly one day if Daniel felt comfortable with that. Daniel considered her words for a moment before answering. He said that Lily liked meeting people who cared about science projects and building things. Sophia smiled gently at that. Outside, the sky had turned a deep evening blue, and the parking lot lights flickered on one by one. Daniel finally pushed himself away from the hallway wall and slipped his jacket over his shoulders. He said that life had surprised both of them tonight. Sophia agreed quietly. They walked together toward the school entrance, not as strangers and not exactly as the people they once were, but as two lives that had unexpectedly crossed paths again after 12 years of silence. And as the doors opened to the cool night air, it felt less like the end of a story and more like the quiet beginning of a new chapter neither of them had planned, but both of them understood.